Hello everyone, my name is Arjun Karanam, and this is my Unit 4 review video for AP Human Geography. And in this video, I'm going to be talking to you about boundaries, states, and boundary disputes. And let's just blaze through this. What are boundaries? Boundaries are lines that help us define the political landscape. Boundaries change over time, but how they're made doesn't change over space, and I'll get to this later in the review video about how boundaries are made. And so boundaries are basically how we humans organize the political landscape and divvy up the land and say, okay, this is yours, this is mine, and this all links back to human territoriality. Now, there are four types of boundaries. The first is an antecedent boundary. An antecedent boundary is a boundary that served as a boundary before humans, they're pretty much physical features. An example of this can be rivers or mountains and so on. Here I have a picture of the Ohio River, which serves as an antecedent boundary. Next, we have subsequent boundaries, and they're boundaries that are agreed on over time. And since these boundaries are usually negotiated through, and the countries are making sure that the boundary serves both of them and is in their mutual interests, the two countries are usually in a friendly relationship. And so here we have the U.S. Canadian border. Next, we have the superimposed boundary, which is a boundary drawn by a third party. And an example of this would be when the British were leaving, they divvied up India into three parts: Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. And another example of this would be the carving up of the Ottoman Empire, or the carving up of Africa, where third parties drew the boundaries. And finally, we have relic boundaries, which are boundaries that used to function but today no longer serve as a boundary. And so, the most obvious example of this is the Great Wall of China, which used to mark the Chinese border but no longer does. And that's good and all, but how do we create boundaries? There's an official process for creating boundaries, and there's four stages for it: definition, delimitation, demarcation, and then finally administration. The first step is definition. In the definition stage, boundaries are negotiated between the two or more parties. Generally, this is the step that takes the largest amount of time, because this is when the two countries are deciding, or two or more countries are deciding what goes where. They're deciding that, okay, you can have this, I'll have this, and this is the negotiation stage. And as we all know, the negotiation stage is when it's going to take the longest. Next, we have delimitation, which is putting the agreed boundary upon the maps. And here I have a picture of the world, because that's the map. And then next we have demarcation, and this is putting a visible marker on the boundary so that it can be identified. And so you have to keep in mind the boundaries are are man-made; they're not natural. And so because of this, humans will want to mark the land and say that, okay, this is mine, this is yours. And so here we have the Belgium-Netherlands border. And then finally, there's the administration stage. And this is where the countries decide, okay, how's the boundary going to function? Is it going to be like the North Korea-South Korea border, where nobody's allowed to cross, is going to be heavily militarized? Or is it going to be like the Schengen area in Europe, where people can easily cross between and won't be questioned at all? Next, we'll be talking about state shapes. There are five state shapes. Those are fragmented, elongated, prorupt, perforated, and compact. Our first state shape is fragmented. A fragmented state is any state that contains several different pieces, and these different pieces are generally separated by water or another country. An example of this would be Indonesia, Russia, the UK, because of Northern Ireland being separated from the main body, France, because of French Guiana, or Australia because of Tanzania. Next, we have elongated states, which are long and thin and stretched out. An example of this would be Chile, Panama, Italy, Norway, and Vietnam. Benefits of an elongated state is that a lot of land, they'll have more land because it will stretch longer, and because of more land, they'll have more natural resources, and they'll have more people, and they'll have a lot of sea control and coastal control, which is really, really good for trade. The problem is there's a disconnect with the people in the extreme north and the extreme south. Now let's go back to this one. I didn't mention this. The benefits of a fragmented state are that you have more land and more people and more natural resources. But the con with this is that you have great separation on the fragments of the state, and this can cause a disconnect between the people. And also, it will be hard to get infrastructure to that area because and transportation services because you're either gonna have to cross water or a complete separate country. Next, we have a prorupt state, and a prorupt state is a country that is similar to a compact state, but has a piece jutting out of the side. Examples of this are Thailand, Burma, Congo, and Mozambique. The benefits of a prorupt state is that, like before, you have more territory, which means more people and more natural resources. The con of a prorupt state is that you have a disconnectedness at the end. And also, if you look here, if Thailand decided to invade Burma or Myanmar right here, it'd be extremely hard for them to defend it because it's kind of far away from the mainland. And so that can be seen as yet another con. Next, we have perforated states. And this is when a state completely surrounds another state. One key issue to note here is that a perforated state is a state that is doing the surrounding. So, for the examples, South Africa would be the perforated state. Italy would be the perforated state. And some pros of a perforated state is that it can completely dictate the other country's trade. And so that doesn't really matter in the case of the Vatican City. But when you look at South Africa and Lesotho, Lesotho has to completely rely on South Africa to ship its goods. And the con is it will usually not have good relations with that country, and it's usually going to be a liability for the country. Next, we have compact states, and compact states are generally clumped together. They're fairly small, and they're ideally in a circle so that everything is kind of like shaped together, everything is equidistant from the center. And certain examples of this are Austria, Poland, Germany, Hungary, and Bhutan. Benefits of a compact state are that they're connected together. They get a feeling of connectedness amongst the people. It's easy to defend. But the cons is you have smaller territory, which means you have less people and less natural resources. Okay, so now let's talk about exclaves and enclaves. Enclaves are either a state that is surrounded by another state or part of a state that is surrounded by another state. Here we have San Marino completely surrounded by Italy. Or another example of this is parts of India and Bangladesh that are completely surrounded by each other. I have a picture of this later, and we'll talk about it then. Then we have exclaves, which is a state or a part of a state that is not part of the mainland. So it's basically a part of a fragmented state. And so going back to our fragmented state example earlier of Australia, Tasmania would be the fragment or the exclave of Australia. And so now here's something to think about. And so you see, if you look at this map, there's this little part of India that's completely surrounded by Bangladesh, which is then completely surrounded by India, which is then completely surrounded by Bangladesh. This is the world's only third order enclave. And so what you might want to think about is that imagine if you're India in this situation, or you're Bangladesh in this situation. Think about how hard it is to get infrastructure to these areas. You'd have to go through Bangladesh, and then you have to go through Bangladesh again. Or think about if you're a commuter, you have to cross international boundaries twice to go to your workplace over here. So you can see all the problems that this would cause, the feeling of disconnected it could cause amongst the countries and amongst the people living in these areas, in these enclaves. And so you can't have politics without some kind of disputes. And so now let's talk about boundary disputes. Boundary disputes generally occur due to interpretation errors. And that's gotten better because of our increased understanding of technology. And we're not drawing maps blindly anymore. We have a knowledge of the entire world. And so we're saying, okay, we're making educated boundary lines. The first boundary type is a definitional boundary, and this is caused due to the language of the original boundary agreement, and it focuses on the legal language. And so here, the Chile-Argentinian border, and so the countries are arguing where the boundary actually is. One country is saying it's on the mountaintops, while another country is saying somewhere else. So it focuses on the legal language of it. Next, we have locational boundary disputes, and this is a dispute over where the boundary actually is. And this can also be places where the boundaries are hard to mark, like maritime or in like a desert or somewhere that's hard to go to. So, what's interesting about this little picture I have here is that this is currently a boundary dispute between Egypt and Sudan. And so what you have here is you have this area called the Halaib Triangle. It's very well populated. It's got plenty of natural resources, and both countries want this particular area. And then there's this little area over here that's virtually uninhabited, no natural resources, and a place that these two countries don't want. So Sudan says that the boundary should be over here, while Egypt says the boundary should be over here. And this goes back to a dispute between France and the British, and them saying then establishing the boundaries when they left. But so basically, Sudan wants this area, wants this to be the boundary, and Egypt wants this to be a boundary because they want this triangle. And so we had the situation where neither of these countries is claiming this little area in the middle, because if Sudan were to claim this area, they'd also have to recognize that this is the border. And if Egypt were to claim this area, they'd have to recognize that this was the border. So virtually, you have here is two countries eyeing this area over here, and neither country claiming this area at all. Next, we have operational boundaries, and this is a dispute over the purpose and the function of the boundary. And so we can see this between the U.S. And Mexico, and them having uh, differing views of what the boundary should do and how people should be able to cross it. Next, and then we have an allocation boundary dispute, and this is how natural dispute on how natural resources are distributed. And so we can see this. This is the most common today. And so an example of this is between Iraq and Kuwait and the distribution of oil. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you.